This week's show brought to you by Adam Vinatieri, who really won a Super Bowl with the game out of time. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, and today we'll be talking about LeBron James, the Celtics, Isaiah Thomas, and Phillip Rivers' new ride. As always, we are produced by our own voice of God, man of many hats, co-host Brian Foster. Say hey, Brian.
Yeah, what's going on, Dre? I guess we're officially in the doldrums of the offseason now that Game of Thrones is gone. Rick and Morty's on hiatus this week, but there's still a lot of NBA topics. We managed to find some non-NBA topics as well, so yeah, it's gonna be a fun show.
Thank God for the Kyrie Irving trade, and we're going to talk a little bit about Isaiah Thomas and the sadness and all that. So I don't mean to denigrate it in the sense of bashing any player or thanking any player or whatever, because I know players' lives have changed, teams have been changed, but it's real news because one of my most hated off seasons ever was the Michael Vick off season, where you hit the doldrums of the off season. And sports has to have news, and every sports site I went to was just talking about Michael Vick. And I'm not saying that's not an important issue, and it's not supposed to care. But it's it does suck when you hit a part of the off season and there's nothing to talk about, and
stick to sports, Dre. No, I agree.
The people are gonna latch on to something. So I'm so glad that at least we are arguing about the East. At least we are arguing about what the East is going to look like. Did the Celtics make the right call? Did Cleveland make the right call? What's going to happen? Usually we always talk about this every offseason. Those topics kind of quickly get fizzled out, right? Kevin Durant goes to the Warriors. We're all excited. And then Kevin Durant leaves the Warriors. Not Kevin Durant leaves the Warriors. Then it's over, right? Then, we get all excited. The metaphor I'll think of is, do you remember there's a Seinfeld episode where Kramer convinces a used car salesman to let him drive a car with no gas in the tank as long as they can to see how long he can drive the car with no gas. The reason being he knows Jerry's going to buy it and he wants to borrow it from Jerry, and he's a terrible friend. He wants to know how much he can drive it without having to refill the gas. So, and then there's this scene where at the very end they're both wooing as the car runs out of gas, and then they kind of slowly come down, and then it's it's over. And then Kramer's okay, I'm going to get out and leave. So that's what the offseason usually feels like, right? We're where's Kevin Durant going to go? Oh my God, is this guy going to resign? What's going to happen? Oh my goodness.
Wait, so how does this analogy work? Are we all Jerry and then the offseason news is Kramer? Is that what you're saying?
No, we are all Kramer and the used car salesman.
Oh, I like that more.
Gas, and we're being excited that the car, oh my goodness, we've taken the car this many miles on the empty tank. We're doing it. This is so much time to waste on an at best a tenuous metaphor, Brian. So let's get into that point. Obviously, one of the biggest pieces of news makes sense, right? Because it's the off season. Is next season's off season. So LeBron James, many people are already speculating he's not returning to Cleveland because Cleveland ownership is so messed up. Now, of course, this didn't stop him from coming back, so I'm not going to count my chickens, right? There have been many, many seasons where people knew where LeBron James was going to go, and at the last second, he changed his mind. Allegedly. He probably had better ideas than we did, but at the last second, in terms of what the mainstream media thought, LeBron James didn't do what people expected, right? This is one reason Kevin Draper has been critical of Adrian Wojnarowski, is that Adrian Wojnarowski during the decision was just throwing darts at a board, and LeBron James' camp gave him no info, and then none of what Adrian Wojnarowski came to pass. And none of what Adrian Wojnarowski said came to pass. So same point here. We got a year. We have no idea what Cleveland's going to look like by the end of the season. But I was really interested in LeBron James because everybody's really excited. Where's LeBron James going to go? Where's LeBron James going to go? I have some friends that are convinced he's going to Los Angeles to play next to Lonzo Ball. Obviously, LeBron James has decided who goes to the Eastern Conference Finals 7 straight seasons now, possibly 8, probably 8, right, if he stays healthy. And so I started looking into his numbers just for some fun comparisons. And the first player I wanted to look at was Michael Jordan, because this popped into my head as I kind of said, I always knew this, and people kind of forget this. Michael Jordan really stopped being what we would think of as Michael Jordan in 1996. So much credit of Michael Jordan's career belongs with his teammates. And I don't even mean that to say that meanly against Michael Jordan. I've said this many times. Michael Jordan goes on my Mount Rushmore. If we talk a concept we bring up all the time, Brian, the Bricado Prime. This is named after James Bricado. We basically look at a player's 6 best seasons in their career, and then that gives us a nice way of comparing great players without having to worry about longevity or if one player missed a season for injury or whatever. Michael Jordan's Bricado Prime is one of the tops ever. And not to mention, if we really do argue a two-way player, right, offense and defense, one of the best seasons of all time is Dennis Rodman's 1992. But Dennis Rodman really was amazing at defense and rebounding. And while he was useful on offense, he wasn't like amazing at offense. Whereas Michael Jordan, literally in his prime, 1988, 1989, did freaking everything amazingly. So I'm not meaning to say that Michael Jordan isn't as great as people think, but what people forget is really the second three-peat in Michael Jordan's career was much more that he was on one of the greatest teams ever assembled in one of the greatest situations ever assembled. The NBA shortened the three-point line, and he joined a Bulls team that basically had a bunch of players that were either three-point specialists or defensive specialists. You put those two together, and it was an amazing combination. So Michael Jordan in 1996, that's his last really peak era Jordan. In 1997, he's a star player, but he's not really even close to Michael Jordan. In 1998, he does win MVP, but he wins MVP with 53.3 true shooting percentage. It's worth noting Michael Jordan's career average, so that includes the Washington Wizards days. His career average is over 60% true shooting. So 1998, bullshit, Michael Jordan was the same player you would think of, and he did not deserve the MVP. Nowhere close. But that's what got me thinking, is I basically said Michael Jordan, he fizzled in like 1998, 1997 was his last good year, and even then it was a step below what he had been. And so you look at LeBron James, and really, if we're talking LeBron James compared to Michael Jordan, LeBron James is entering what would be Michael Jordan's last productive season. And then something else I brought up in this article where I think I named it LeBron James in a Battle of the Ages. LeBron James has played at this point 15,000 more minutes, regular season and playoffs combined, than Michael Jordan had at the same point. One really cool thing, I didn't realize this, so when I finally added up the numbers, Kobe Bryant currently beats LeBron James in terms of minutes played. Kobe Bryant is by age 32, the metric I used was players' age at the end of the playoffs. Basketball Reference does something similar, but they actually do, I believe, at February 1st of the season. So basically they say, what's the player's age as of February 1st? I say when how old are they exiting the season? LeBron James was 32 years old right before the end of the last game of the playoffs this season. But so, Kobe Bryant exiting the season, was 32 versus LeBron James exiting the season, he was 32. Kobe Bryant had put up about 1,000 more minutes regular season plus playoff combined. And that's impressive, actually, because one of Kobe Bryant's season was the lockout shortened 1999 season. That was only 50 games, whereas LeBron James's lockout shortened season was in 2011, 2012, and Kobe even played that season as well. So all the credit in the world. One of the things that we've always said about Kobe Bryant is longevity, and he at this point in their respective careers, he's beaten LeBron James in terms of time on the court, which really impressed me. Yeah,
and I mean, aside from obviously being one of the best players of all time, that's very impressive. It's also impressive how he manages to stay on the court and play so many minutes in this number of seasons. He may not end up playing as many seasons as some players like Kareem, but to play this many minutes and stay healthy is just incredible. I want to go ahead.
Karl. Never know, right? Like Karl Malone did that, where he was very healthy throughout his career. So it's very possible LeBron James could do that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think of, again, this is like just stuff people say I don't know any data behind it, but you think of like the bigger guys, the buffer guys as, being heavier and maybe being easier to get injured, but not those guys. They're just so big and well built. They just stayed healthy. So I don't know. Can I put you on the spot a little bit, Dre, since we were talking about John Stockton earlier? One of our great commenters, Mass Says, asked about John Stockton. So I don't know if you looked at him in his early to mid 30s at all for this post or not.
I did, and it makes me sad. I actually had a spreadsheet with a bunch of data. It's on, for those of you that listen to the show on a weekly basis, this is my weekly F My Old Surface Pro promotion. I didn't transfer it over to this computer, so it would take a while. So, yeah, basically what I did for fun, right, is I looked at LeBron James at this age, at this many minutes, and kind of compared him to some other greats. And they were, to be fair, they were kind of greats by default, right? You don't play 50,000 minutes in the NBA without, being a pretty good player, even Kobe Bryant, right?
You have your Kevin Willis's every once in a while, but generally you're right.
And so all of the players, when I started kind of doing this comparison, all of the players were great. One of the names that was interesting to me is John Stockton. And this is a very good name to bring up because I had like a tale of three Lakers. That could have been another alternative title. If I were cracked, like in the morning, right, it would have been called what I called it. In the afternoon, it would have changed its title to A Tale of LeBron James and A Tale of Three Lakers. If you're a Lakers fan thinking you're going to get LeBron James next season, there are three important players to compare him to. You've got Kobe Bryant, who, like LeBron James, was a high schooler who has been to a ton of finals, right? I think by how many did he end up in total at the end of his career? So let's see. They won the first three-peat.
At least five.
So that's it's way more than that. So at least they went to 4 with him and Shaq winning 3. Then they made it to another 3 winning 2.
He went to 7.
So I think
wow.
That's seven total, right? So he made it to 7. Made it to 7 finals. A final, 2 finals MVP, a regular season MVP. By the way, if you're like doing Kobe versus LeBron James, obviously LeBron James already has more MVPs, more everything, right? It's a stupid argument at this point. And they played in similar overlapping eras, so you can't even use that as an out. So, by the way, funny note, Brian, because we're talking comments, on last week's show, one of the YouTube comments was, I dare you to go a show without talking about Kobe. We failed that miserably. But to be fair, when the hook I was going for was Kobe Bryant versus Michael Jordan, obviously not LeBron James. I meant to say LeBron James versus Michael Jordan, but obviously Kobe Bryant always ends up in that discussion needlessly. And then when I was looking, what would happen if LeBron James went to LA, you're not going to avoid Kobe Bryant. So anyway, Kobe Bryant, high schooler, played in a ton of finals, played in a ton of playoffs, racked up a ton of minutes. At this point in their respective careers, they're very close on age, very close on minutes played. Kobe Bryant has one good season left in him before he just falls off, and he never makes it back to the playoffs. In large part, it's kind of a diss to him, but, while he has one more good season, it's still not peak Kobe levels. So I think that's important to note, right, is LeBron James and Kobe Bryant late in their career are going to command huge contracts, right? Kobe Bryant's last 2 seasons, he commanded a $25 million a year contract. LeBron James, I believe, has 1 year left at $30 million, and like hell, he's not getting a 4 or 5 year deal at $30 million a year, or something similar. If he doesn't do a Kevin Durant, leave a little money on the table for someone else. So that makes it hard for the team, right? Because what I pointed out in this article is, if you look at LeBron James, he's slowed down a little. Now he's still a star player. Help me out, Brian, because it's going to take too long to load it. Last season, I think he ranked top 20 in the NBA, but like rank-wise, where did he rank in terms of all the other players? So I'll keep talking, just cut it whenever we get to that. But so he was great last season, but he's slow to step from like that Miami era, that Miami 4 straight finals. He was ridiculous. Those 4 straight finals, his numbers were freaking sick. And he's a step below that, and arguably last season looked like a bounce, and a term we've used about stock market, et cetera, is like a dead cat bounce. If we basically saw LeBron James dipping a little and he bounced last season, it's entirely possible he's going to keep going down. Who knows what happens? So that was like the Kobe point, is like, if we're looking at Kobe, LeBron James might be done after another season. We're looking at Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was done after 2 more seasons, and what's more important, I brought up this great article from back in the day from Ethan Sherwood Strauss, because I always have to do the Sherwood, Brian. I know he doesn't have that in his title anymore.
It's the name of his Twitter account, right? You have to do it.
I think he's just Ethan Strauss on Twitter now.
Oh, is he? He wasn't for a long time.
Back in the day, it was Ethan Sherwood Strauss, and you got to put this in. That's how you identify real basketball fans. That's how you identify Warriors fans who were Warriors fans before it was cool. They had the Sherwood in the middle.
Yeah.
So Ethan Sherwood-Strauss had this great article about how the NBA shortened the three-point line from 1996 and 1997, and that was a huge boost to not LeBron James, to Michael Jordan's career. So same point. LeBron James is basically entering what was the end of Michael Jordan's greatness, but Michael Jordan essentially, it's going to sound mean, had training wheels on or a bumper lane, so some comparison like that. So you got one good season if he's Kobe, two good seasons if he's Michael Jordan. And if he was Shaq, basically he's used the gas tank. So that was kind of the funny part to me. Now, if he's Kareem, it's a little better, right? Where Kareem had a couple more good seasons left. He had 3 star seasons left in him. Because basically this is the season, if we're talking age, this is the season Kareem hooked up with Magic Johnson. So he's got 3 star seasons left, an MVP season left, and a Finals MVP season left. So if you look at LeBron James from that perspective, it's good. But Kareem still declined heavily. So it was fascinating to me to look at LeBron James compared to all these other great players from that perspective. Now, sorry to get way back to the original point. John Stockton, I'd argue Tim Duncan. These are players that played great until the very end, until like they were 40. But what makes it a really, really hard comparison is these players had their minutes managed much, much better, right? Tim Duncan never cracked 2,500 minutes after he hit 32. His minutes were managed from then on out. Is LeBron James going to have his minutes managed? And even if he isn't, don't forget, unlike Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Michael Jordan, he started his career right out of high school and was going full burn, right, the whole way. So it's really hard to compare LeBron James to John Stockton. In this article, right, some of those other comparisons were easier. I didn't have a subtle comparison to John Stockton because it's kind of like John Stockton is what people are hoping for LeBron James, but it is such unprecedented territory to have a player that's played this much and is still going, right? Because that's the key. Kobe Bryant was done. Kobe Bryant never sees the playoffs again after the season he turns 32. You got to argue that LeBron James makes it to at least one more deep finals runs next season, and if he stays in the East, arguably a couple more.
Yeah, and we've got John Stockton's numbers up here, and they are pretty ridiculous. And just to illustrate your point, yeah, he pretty much played at his superstar or high star level all the way till the end, all the way from the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s. And to your point, no one really does this. The only player I can think of that played this long and played this well for that long is Jason Kidd. Managed to do that. He won a title late in his career, actually. So, yeah, pretty remarkable.
What you could note about Jason Kidd, though, and this is kind of important, is look at Jason Kidd's scoring. And, you know, the same thing happened to Andre Iguodala. He took a reduced role. He went from being the MVP player. Don't forget, I think 2003 he finished second in MVP voting. He's MVP scoring triple doubles, but triple doubles on like 20, 10, and 10. And he goes to being like a 10 point, 8 assists, 7 rebound type of guy. And so that's what's both important and interesting to look at is LeBron James has all the skills in his toolbox to be a star player by the wins produced numbers without necessarily needing to be a star, without driving to the hoop every play, without taking 30% of the shots. Would that be a role he'd want to take? And actually, this is going to let me get in a slight rant, Brian, to talk, because I realize what I'm doing seems very similar to a 538 concept with Carmelo, and the precursor to that was Pacoda from Nate Silver. And this idea is you got a player, and you're trying to estimate their career. So what you do is you find a bunch of players based on similar data point. And we've talked about why Carmelo is freaking stupid. You know, some of the data points are things like draft location and where you were drafted and to what team matters tremendously for how your career goes. And not all franchises are created equal.
It's just a big pile of stuff that doesn't affect winning, right?
Hey everybody, Dre from the future here, and just wanted to keep you in the loop as to what's going on. Our connection got really laggy and my audio got really bad, so we turned off our camera. There's not really a good way to edit out this segment, but the audio was just really bad, so I couldn't leave it in. Wanted to let you know what's going on, and it happens again once more in the future, so you'll hear me in the future edit it out. Luckily, Brian stalls while I'm fixing my video and says some fun facts.
Easton Strauss is still at Sherwood Strauss on Twitter, so feel free to keep calling him that, everyone. Absolutely. The second thing is, So you had a question, and I think it was something to the effect of how good LeBron James was last year, right? So if you're just going by total wins produced, he was 12th in wins produced with 13.7. To put things in perspective, Rudy Gobert and DeAndre Jordan both had more than 20. Pretty big difference. So he was one of the best players in the NBA, top 20, top 15 for sure. Maybe top 10 if you want to look at it a different way. But we're used to him being in the top 5 to top 3. So he did fall down a little bit last year. So how are you doing, Dre? Are you still with us right now?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Because it's the,
Excellent.
I can hear you, but sometimes there's the cutout.
Yeah, you sound great.
Well, I mean, just for the LeBron James point, just compare LeBron James to basically 2009 through 2013, where he's top 3, top 2 every year, in some cases cracking top 20. And so I'm just saying, he's slowed since then. But okay, so to bash Bakota, this idea of I've got a player and I'm trying to predict their career and I'm trying to look at data points. And what is really important to note is that not all data points are created equal. So like if you use draft location, understand that matters based on franchise, and even based on franchise, it matters based on the roster makeup. And then we also can't predict things. Even Pacoda, if we're looking at a pitcher and trying to predict what a pitcher is going to age like, a lot of what that is what types of pitch selection they choose to do, and that can be the team they're on, what pitches they choose to do. So what I wanted to say about this piece is I wanted to avoid, although I clearly didn't, the idea of trying to do similarity curves between LeBron James and other players. But what was also really important is when you look at a player like LeBron James, there are so many disparate paths if we're trying to look at what we're expecting him to do that, it's like an exercise in futility. And that's, I don't know if the point came across great in my article. That's kind of the big deal, which is LeBron James has played basically more minutes than anybody else in NBA history going into a season where we expect a playoff run out of him. He has, played at great level for such a long time. Who knows what's going to happen? And we basically got, at minimum, I would say at least 4 more years of LeBron James, barring a career-ending injury. Hey everybody, Dre from the future here again. This is the second part of the video where my audio just really goes to hell, but I wanted to re-record some of what I said. And what we were talking about is just age and how age really does matter for athletic performance and how LeBron James is now decently into his 30s, and by the time he hits the free market next year, he'll be a year older, and we just know that athletes across all fields in their 30s just decline, and LeBron James's numbers, despite being star level, are still slowly taking a dip, and typically when players start taking that dip, they just keep going downhill. And I also was able to make a few comparisons to some other players. I actually talked about Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor, and how typically an athlete who is good at one activity can't just be good at another activity. Another example I gave for that was Michael Jordan at baseball, where despite the fact that Michael Jordan was the greatest ever at basketball, or arguably the greatest ever at basketball, he wasn't even that great as a minor league baseball player. And the only reason Conor McGregor was able to last 10 rounds against Floyd Mayweather is because Floyd Mayweather is 40 years old. We just do not expect star players to, be able to persist that long. We talked a little bit about John Stockton earlier in the show, but it is usually pretty rare that star athletes can just keep playing at that high of a level, especially when they start declining. And LeBron James, as I keep noting, is just really an unprecedented territory with the amount of wear and tear he's put on his body at this point in his career while still being competitive. And I actually am noting that I think he could be another Kobe, in that Kobe Bryant at the end of his career was making $25 million a season, despite the fact that he was just completely done. His body was just completely broken down. He was not the player he was before. LeBron James, if he sticks around for 4 or 5 more years and gets another big payday or two, it's unlikely he'll still be a star player by the end of his career, no matter how we think he's going to go. We really can't predict that. So I thought that was a little funny that I ended up comparing him to Kobe Bryant at the end. Nothing new there. Anyway, Brian's going to pick up where I left off on that, and sorry about the technical difficulties this week.
Yeah, I think Kobe's kind of a unique case. Not a unique case, but here's what I mean. So So there is actually a video. I can't remember what network it was for, or if it was for a website or something. Maybe it was YouTube. Of it was like LeBron James and Draymond Green sitting together in a barber shop, talking about basketball. That kind of typical thing to do. I can't remember if there are any other players in there with them, but one of the clips that they shared about that I listened to was something to the effect of the two of them talking about, well, most of the players in the NBA don't even know how to play basketball. And I don't know exactly what they meant there, but what I got out of it is most players in the NBA don't play the way they do, which is, playing defense, switching, passing, just being a basic team player, right? Like those two guys obviously are. So part of the reason Kobe got bad as he got older is that he has one dimension to his game, and that's it, just shooting fadeaway mid-range shots. And he's not willing to try other stuff out.
To defend Kobe, but I completely disagree. I mean, he
was a good defender, but
maybe. I mean, we've had this discussion too,
sure,
where he was making all defense teams, and I was looking at his synergy stats numbers, and they weren't that great. And I've looked before and gone, it's really interesting how his defense would magically vanish when he'd lose bigs like Shaquille O'Neal and Pau Gasol, and then reappear when he got bigs like Shaq and Pau Gasol. But I mean, we've looked at his numbers, and he was, his career numbers for shooting, he's average, right? His true shooting percentage for a guard, or for an NBA player throughout his career is pretty much average. And then his skill was shooting free throws, but he did a lot of other stuff good. But it's kind of if your game has a weakness in it, but you're able, this is the really stupid common line about athletic players, right? If you've got a player that's able to rely on athleticism when they're younger, I've heard this about Dwight Howard, although Dwight Howard has stayed great for what it's worth. And then they get a little older and they can't just rely on being able to overpower people. Their game can take a step back, and that's basically what happened with Kobe. Right, when he was younger, he would take these inefficient shots, but at least he would take them at a clip that was reasonable, and that would make up. But then he loses a step on his shooting, he loses a step on his passing, he loses a step on his defense, and suddenly, instead of being an above-average player, he's a below-average player.
Yeah, no, that pretty much covers what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of any. Yeah, I can't think of much else. I just, it was a lot of fun to look at LeBron James, kind of compare him to some other players. It's definitely fun to look at players where they were at different parts of their career. It is funny to think that basically, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, his best years in terms of what made his reputation, right, were still behind him. The entire span of Kareem with the Lakers has yet to happen if they were the same career. Now, of course, he's already, much like LeBron, Kareem at this point had already won 4 MVPs. So it's, it's not a completely great comparison, but that is fascinating. It's fascinating to be LeBron James has played a Shaquille O'Neal's tank worth of games at this point, which is nuts. So the fact that we're still talking about him is great, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the NBA, and I really hope something happens in the East. It's not hard to look at it and just go, most NBA teams are not well run. And the teams that are well run are all in the West at this point, and they're clustered in freaking Texas. So you basically got the Spurs, the Rockets, the Warriors, and the Mavericks. And I've made this point before. I really argue really only the Spurs have been consistently good, and they seem to have lost a step. And the Warriors, be it luck or whatever, currently are light years ahead in that they're not really making mistakes like other teams are. And if you're a team with 2 stars and you just don't make mistakes in your stars' primes, that is a recipe for success. That was why the Bulls were so great. Everybody attributes it to Michael Jordan, and we talked about this. That team had no weaknesses. It wasn't just 2 stars and an amalgamation of random players. They had players like Kukoc and Steve Kerr and a couple other good names that I'm dropping, obviously, in addition to their big 3, and that's the key. And so right now, that's the Warriors, and the East just doesn't have anybody. And it's funny to think of LeBron James and Michael Jordan. No LeBron James and Michael Jordan in the East. NBA looks way different as soon as the bad boy Pistons and Larry Bird are done, and that's really funny to think about, especially since both players. Michael Jordan's always compared to Portland, right? Because they could have picked him in theory. LeBron James, as I pointed out, breaks my heart. But the Denver Nuggets have the same record and the same odds of getting him as the Cavaliers. So NBA history, if LeBron James and Michael Jordan go west, is way different, including dominance, right? Like Michael Jordan, it's arguable, might not make it to 6 finals. Although I actually this tangent, I'm way off on that tangent because there was some great.
If David Stern hadn't rigged the lottery and sent Patrick Ewing to New York, I guess they didn't win any titles. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Trey.
Yeah, they made it. Oh man, we could talk John Starks and like the worst Game 7 of NBA history. That has to be the worst. Sorry, we have way too many historical tangents. We'll look into these for future articles, maybe. Anything else to say on LeBron? The piece. It was just a lot of fun to compare LeBron James and his age.
Yeah, I think that's why I really liked it, just to see what he's done and what he's going to do next versus other players, and it's really interesting where all those historical stars were at that point in their career.
Speaking of Los Angeles, because they are the team on the docket at this point, you called it a Bush League tampering allegation. So they were fined, if I'm not mistaken, $500,000 for basically trying to court Paul George. Magic Johnson even told Jeannie Buss it's his bad and he'll take the pay cut if need be. Obviously, I don't think that's going to happen. I've seen funny takeaways where, if it's just $500,000, if that's all you're caught with for trying to lure a star, and we've discussed this problem before, right? Star players, their salaries are capped. Kevin Durant took a pay cut, but the reason he was willing to take a pay cut is because he was only allowed to make I put that in quotes. It's a funny thing. We'll bring this up with Phillip Rivers. He was only allowed to make $30 million. So him taking a $4 million pay cut, yeah, that's a decent chunk of change and still like over 10% of his salary, but it's not as egregious as if star players' salaries were uncapped. Obviously, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, James Harden, these players, Kawhi, are worth like $50 million in the open market.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Bush League quote actually comes from this article we're showing right now. Silver Screen and Roll is the website. It's the Lakers SB Nation site, so it's obviously very biased towards the Lakers. But yeah, they quote an anonymous executive who said that it was Bush League of the Pacers to file this complaint to the league and force the league to investigate the Lakers on this Paul George tampering. The reason being, basically, Paul George has said in public he wants to go to the Lakers. And on top of that, every team in the league tampers, and if you're not tampering, you're not trying. And it's dumb to make an example out of the Lakers because everyone does it. And I agree with all that, and you can comment on that too as well. But, these tampering rules, again, seem like just rules to help out the owners and hurt the players and their agents in general, and just another stupid rule in the NBA. So I don't know if you want to comment about tampering overall or this situation. I agree with the Lakers fans. It's dumb.
This is not a hard rule. If you allow competition, it will drive up the prices for a rare good. And a lot of NBA history has been reducing competition for star players.
Exactly.
That's the whole reason the draft came into effect. That's the whole reason for bird rights. That's the whole reason for restricted free agency. All of these rules basically are owners saying, we don't want to have to pay LeBron James $50 million. So let's set the rules so we don't have to. And it's the reason all of the owners agree to it is because while it does prevent some owners, right, the Knicks can't just go out and buy the best players every year, even though they tried it once and just failed in spectacular fashion. The best teams, the Lakers, can't just go out and buy the players they want. It does mean that when they get the players they want, they're able to afford them for a decent stretch of time. So I agree that the tampering rules, they don't exist for the benefit of anything beyond the owner's bottom line. They just don't want to have to pay more for talent. And, that's not anything surprising. And if you look at a lot of the rules, the CBA, whatever, they fall under themselves, right? Because a lot of these rules exist for competitive balance, and then it goes both ways, right? The rules, bird rights and stuff that allow super teams are to prevent players from just going all to the same team, to prevent the Lakers from just buying the best players. So that's why you've got to have bird rights and stuff. But then if you've got things like bird rights and different contract structures see the Warriors, well, a smart team is able to take advantage of contract structure and get all the good players for 5 years. So then everybody's complaining, well, I don't have a shot at good players. So it's kind of like they'll use this line, competitive balance, competitive balance, competitive balance, but they'll just use it whatever way they need to for the rules to go. And then when we examine enough of the rules, we'll notice they're self-contradictory. So on the tampering, like I said, really, yeah, when you have star players maxed, if a team wants to spend beyond that to acquire the player, they'll do stuff like this. They will risk a tampering fine. Or, back in the day, the Cavaliers on multiple occasions have just hired a new coach to placate LeBron James. And that's because they can't, what they would do normally if LeBron James is mad is say, we'll just give you $5 million more a year, $10 million more a year. They're not allowed to do that. So they go, what do we need to do? Do we need a new coach? Do we need to get you a friend? Do we need this? That's what they will do. And so that's all that's happening here. Although, like I said, the ultra funny part to me about this is that I really don't think Los Angeles should be targeting Paul George. He was almost on my list of overhyped players going to this season. He's definitely going to be on it for next season. We liked Paul George when he was younger. He is not the same player as he was. And it's Andrew Sutton brought this up, the boiler room point. There's a quote in the movie, boiler room, act as if, and Andrew Sutton said that's great advice for NBA teams. It's fine to be optimistic that Paul George is going to come back and be a star again. It's optimistic to think that LeBron James is going to play great like John Stockton till he's 40, but act as if Paul George is who we see as the last couple of seasons. Act as if LeBron James is slowing down. Act as if, rookies aren't predictable. That's what teams need to do. And so if you act as if with Paul George, he's not the player you should be targeting. And there were other good players, right? Like Jimmy Butler, et cetera. So there have been players on the market that I argue the Lakers, had they been on the ball, could have acquired and already be on their way to competing. Whereas next season, it's really just going to be, can they get Lonzo Ball up to speed?
Yeah, that's right. And Paul George hasn't proven he can be back to being a star after he had that injury. I mean, it sucks. It's not his fault, right? Some players recover from injury and some don't. He still might be able to do it, but act as if he won't.
Exactly. I don't have like a smooth transition, but it kind of relates where when we're talking about tampering and teams trying to coerce star players to play with them, there was a fantastic article that Isaiah Thomas, the second one obviously, but one currently in the NBA, wrote in the Players Tribune about being traded from the Celtics, and there's just a lot of great comments. I'm going to try and see. I'm going to try and see if I can get the Kevin Durant quote. I'm going to try and actually just read it off because he brings up this point about how basically the powers all go to the owners, and we're talking even with tampering. We're talking about that point here, but Isaiah Thomas had a great point. And here, I'm just going to read the quote. This was actually at CSN, the sports section, but this is from the original quote is from the Player Tribune, an article by Isaiah Thomas. His words: "I was thinking about last year with KD and his free agency, about how people gave him such a hard time for doing what he felt was best for him and his future, how he turned into a villain just for doing what was his right to do as a free agent in the league. Suddenly it was, oh, he's selfish, or oh, he's a coward. Suddenly, just for doing business on his end and doing right by himself, he was portrayed as this bad guy. But that's what I think my trade can show people. I want them to see how getting traded, just like that, without any warning, by the franchise that I scratched and clawed for and bled for, and I put everything on the line for, that's why people need to fix their perspective. It's like, man, with a few exceptions, unless we're free agents, 99 times out of 100, it's the owners with the power. So when the players are getting moved left and right and having their lives changed without any say-so, and it's no big deal, but then a handful of times that it flips and the player has control, then it's some scandal, just being honest. But to me, that says a lot about where we are as a league and even as a society, and it says a lot about how far we still have to go.
Amen.
Great words. And it was funny. I don't remember the author or the article. I briefly went back and forth with him on Twitter about this, where he wrote an article which, first off, I didn't even click on it, clickbaity headline. I'm breaking one of my rules. I do the research, but it's one of those where you see the headline, you see the premise, and you're like, I'm not going to give you the benefit of even looking at that, because he said loyalty is becoming a lost thing in the NBA. And his point, he says, that he made in the article is that when we think of teams, we can't think of the franchise player anymore, which is bullshit, right? Like Steph Curry and the Warriors, who he's been with his entire career. James Harden and the Rockets, who he's pledged he's going to stay with his whole career, although as Isaiah Thomas pointed out, unless he's got a no-trade clause, that ain't happening. Even LeBron James, who is the face of the Cavaliers, it's bullshit to not buy that there aren't franchise players with teams that we have association with the league. And even if we go back in time to the 60s with Wilt Chamberlain getting moved, in the 70s with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Moses Malone getting moved, and the 80s with Moses Malone getting moved, and the 90s, obviously, Shaq being the big name, the 2000s, Pau Gasol and LeBron James. It's like there has always been faces of the franchise player movement. But the key point to me was the rules back in the day, in like the golden era of the NBA, which is, again, bullshit to me, didn't allow rules, right? Didn't allow player movement by the rules. For instance, it wasn't until the Oscar Robertson rule, which came up in the 70s, that restricted free agency was allowed, and let that keyword restricted be a giveaway to you that the players still didn't have control. And I really liked Isaiah Thomas's point where he said 99 out of 100 times. What's really, really funny about that point is there have only been a handful of superstar moves every couple of seasons throughout NBA history. And I would really, really argue the only time the owners didn't have the power was Shaquille O'Neal when he moved to the Lakers. Because even now, we brought up this point of bird rights, Kevin Durant, to go to the Warriors, had to leave money in terms of salary on the table. Now, we can argue, yeah, there's money to be made up in endorsements, or money to be made up for going further in the playoffs, or money to be made up for having that finals MVP added to his resume. But that's irrespective, right? This is one of those things that's always bugged me about companies where they try and act as if the perks that they give you are extra instead of just being part of your salary. when Silicon Valley is famous for this, right? Food, they always bring up the food. Oh, the food's amazing, food's amazing, food's amazing.
You pay for it.
I can put a freaking price tag on the food, and I guarantee you your HR department puts a price tag on how much food they expect to pay to employee, and that's how they dictate my salary. So it's kind of bullshit for teams to go like, well, it's extra. It's a bonus to get to play next to Curry. No, that's part of it. And the fact that the rules dictate that teams aren't allowed to pay more, that's just what it is. So the players do not have the power, and I really loved Isaiah Thomas's point. And, it's funny. When MVP caliber player Kevin Durant leaves for the Warriors on his own, he's a villain. Even though we could argue very easily this is what's good for the league. I don't give a damn what people say. We talked about the BS of competitive balance with like LeBron James and the CBA stuff, Brian. The most successful the NBA has been in NBA history has happened 2 times. And in both times, it was when the same players were ending up in the finals year after year. The NBA's peak in terms of television performance was when Michael Jordan retired in 1998 after back-to-back finals between the Chicago Bulls and the Utah Jazz. That was the absolute peak. And arguably what hurt it was losing its star. They should have given Michael Jordan some money and put him on another team and kept him around. They should have WWE'd this, right? Hulk Hogan still wrestling in his 40s and 50s despite the fact that he has a bad hip. The last couple seasons have been the only years where the TV ratings have even gotten close to their heyday, and obviously they're never going to go back to that, right? With Netflix, with DVR, with so much competition, we're never going to see 90s level TV ratings again. But the NBA's TV ratings have been fantastic with the Cavaliers versus the Warriors year after year after year. So it was in the NBA's best interest to form a super team in California, in a big market, in an affluent market. It would be in the NBA's best interest to actually turn Boston into something good. Right? They should really pluck LeBron James and put him in Boston. Pluck John Wall, put him in Boston. That won't happen. So it's really funny that, like Isaiah Thomas is pointing out, he's being portrayed as a villain, even though he's doing what, at least if we ask the economists, at least if we ask the historians, what is in the NBA's best interest. But then, like Isaiah Thomas points out, when it's the other way around, when the player gets flipped, how quick was the league turning on Isaiah Thomas, right? There were articles saying Isaiah Thomas was not a good teammate. The mainstream media, oh my God, this sounds so freaking Trumpian and political. But the mainstream media was bending over backwards, Brian, to explain why Boston was right to trade Isaiah Thomas, an MVP caliber player, right? He finished top 5 in the voting. But when Kevin Durant did it, they were bending over backwards to explain why Kevin Durant was selfish.
Yeah, absolutely. And, earlier in your rant, you bring up the word loyalty and about how an author was using that word. And the way he was using it, at least according to you anyway, I haven't read that, is not my definition of loyalty, which is where both sides actually need to show respect and loyalty towards each other. It is more like Donald Trump's one-way definition of loyalty, where you need to show absolute loyalty from your end. However, he's going to drop you, what anything goes wrong at the drop of a hat, right? So, yeah, it's not very particularly fair, and it's very Trumpian.
Well, it's
well said.
If you read like marriage advice books, there's this point that if you ask your spouse for a favor, if they don't have the option of saying no, it's not a request, and that can put a weird strain on your relationship. And it's just an important thing to, when you're asking someone for a favor, if they aren't really allowed to say no, then that shows the skewed dynamic. And it's the same point. When you ask about loyalty in the NBA, in the 70s, like the only reason Moses Malone and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Wilt Chamberlain got traded was because the teams thought they were, distractions, essentially. Even Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, it's worth noting, despite being the best player in the league, he asked for a trade, and this is an uncomfortable one, but I'm willing to bet that Milwaukee, which Kareem asked for a trade from because it had a lot of problems with racism in the day, still has a lot of problems with racism. We flash forward 40 years in the future, and I can't remember the player's name. This drives me nuts that I always forget it. But a Milwaukee Bucks player drove up to a jewelry store, and they locked the doors and called the cops because a black man drove to a jewelry store.
Was it Jabari Parker? I don't think so. It was someone older than him.
It up. I don't remember. So yeah, I don't want to get the name wrong. But I'm saying Kareem Abdul-Jabbar asked for a trade, and I'm willing to bet that they were going, he's changing his names, and he's Muslim, and he's got these beliefs. He's a distraction. And Moses Malone was the same way. He allegedly had attitude problems. If it's not loyalty, if the player doesn't have the option of doing what you ask. It wasn't like every season they went up to Kareem and said, please play with us again. They set up every season and said, we have your contract. You have to play with us. And even when he requested to get traded, it was kind of on them to make the trade. So the owners always have the power. And so, yeah, I found loyalty a BS term. And again, I say this is like a minority in the United States, though things are changing a little bit. And goddamn Trump. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to go too much on this rant.
Stick to sports. No, keep going.
I'll say this is like a preemptive shout-out thing, but like the Dreamers Act, fuck that guy to Donald Trump for what he's doing. I'm so angry. And if this is this is a breaking point. Like if you're listening to this show and you're on that side at all, please just go away. Like there are other sports shows you can listen to. There are other analytics shows you can listen to. Not as many as I would like that have our, same opinion, but there are some good ones. Please, we just don't need it. It's easy for me to say as a person of color in this country about that. But when people talk about like the good old days and you go, if you look at the rights that players had in the 60s and 70s compared to now, and you're trying to say, back in the day it was so much better, it's like, no, it was worse. It was a worse product. It was worse for the players. The only thing that it stayed bad for, by the way, is the fans who are paying more and more money in taxes. So I really hate that old, like the weird look of back in the day, sports were so much better when players weren't so uppity.
Yeah, and I don't know. The only example I can think of that's similar to that from my own life, I don't like to talk about myself that much, but I do sometimes. I'm actually a vegetarian, and there's this thing now, Dre, the paleo diet, that I think is total bullshit. And one of the things that people say about it is, well, humans are really unhealthy now, and back when they were cavemen, they were really healthy, and this is what their diet was, so you should eat it. And there's so many problems with that. First of all, it's just wrong, like what the paleo diet says men actually used to eat. They did have grains and all that back then. Secondly, we are so much healthier and have such better life expectancy and quality of living than we used to even 100 years ago. It's just baffling to me that someone could try to pass that off and succeed and have a successful fad diet. So anyway, yeah, you really have to look into, sayings like that and not just take it at their word.
Oh, by the way, I'm going to give a preemptive shout out. So I believe her name is Maureen Ogle, and she was on the Cracked podcast this week, and she did.
I listened to that. That was good.
Oh yeah, so she did a talk about the history of meat in the United States, and she, it's funny because she comes down very pro meat, but in a very nuanced sense, where she's just saying one of the benefits of having a very industrialized food industry is you're able to feed a lot of people, and that gives you the advantages of cities. And so I thought it was very nuanced, where she was saying all these people that are saying, "Oh, we need to get rid of meat. We need to get rid of meat." You go, well, there still has to be ways to feed people and all that. And so it's a great listen. And I'm not going to necessarily, in it, she doesn't even necessarily say meat is good one way or the other. She just kind of says the same point you do. A lot of the talking points are kind of BS. But then she also makes a very, what I loved is I compared this to sports, to Dave Barry's research on stadiums and lockouts and strikes and stuff, which is to say fans will say, if the players lock us out, we're going to stop watching, right? If they have a strike, if they have a lockout, I'm never coming back. And we look at the data, and they always come back. And so she was saying the same thing with meat. She's like, doesn't matter if there's a pink slime story, doesn't matter if there are all these horrible stories about horrible treatment by McDonald's, people always come back for meat. So I love that. Not really related to your point at all. I agree with you. Like, I hate the points of back in the day we were so much healthier with this, or that old. The point about like back in the day we'd eat this, and all you have to go is back in the 50s we didn't have the same regulations on food, so you would buy like chicken in a can. That was a thing, disgusting, and you didn't know if it would kill you, and people would get really sick from it. So yeah, it's really annoying how people remember the good, forget everything else, and then use that as a talking point. I don't know if that tied into anything else we were saying really organically, but is what it is.
Well, is it time to talk Phillip Rivers?
Okay. This last point, just I'm going to let it stick one more time because it makes me sad about the Celtics. You brought this up.
Okay, yeah, let's get that in there.
The Zach Lowe podcast, they were just kind of talking about how Al Horford is probably going to start at center next season. Nothing really surprising. He's played at center. But the reason it kind of made me a little wary is, don't forget, this last season they traded Jay Crowder in the Isaiah Thomas trade. We've argued essentially that Jay Crowder plus Isaiah Thomas is better than Kyrie Irving, although we really like Gordon Hayward. But what scares me is they also traded Avery Bradley for Marcus Morris, and Marcus Morris is the worst Morris. It's so fun to be able to say about various brothers in the NBA. I'm hoping at least one more ball makes the NBA, Brian, so I can say the worst ball. Anyway, yep. And then best ball, that would be fun. Marcus Morris is terrible, and they're saying if Al Horford plays the 5, don't forget they lost Amir Johnson, they're probably going to play Marcus Morris at the 4, and that basically what's rough about that is team is if we compare that team to last year, Gordon Hayward's an upgrade compared to Jay Crowder, but Kyrie Irving's a downgrade compared to Isaiah Thomas. I don't know who they're going to replace. Avery Bradley wasn't great, but it's unlikely either of their rookie players, Jason Tatum and I forgot the other name. Doesn't matter. Either of their young two guards are going to be as good as Avery Bradley, and Marcus Morris is going to be a downgrade from Amir Johnson. So, it's a funny thing where on paper this team's starting lineup is worse than last season's. Now you can make the argument that same starting lineup wouldn't have been as good this season. I've got no complaints with that. I could expect regression to the mean from Isaiah Thomas, regression to the mean from Avery Bradley, both of whom put up career seasons last year. I could expect you to say age on Amir Johnson. No complaints. I just spent the entire first segment of the show talking age. So I'm not trying to compare what the roster could have been this year to what it is. But I'm just saying, if you're looking at this team that squeaked out 53 wins last season, and I'm going, they have downgraded their roster from last year. So it means if you're a Celtics fan, you should be a little scared because 53 wins barely won the East last season. And I would argue, Washington looks pretty good. Charlotte's improved. Cleveland's improved. So if you're a Celtics fan, I wouldn't be happy about what this team did this offseason.
Yeah, and I agree. We didn't like that trade at all, even with the extra second-round draft pick, which is kind of a funny dog and pony show. They just don't have a lot of depth up front right now. If Horford does go down, and again, he's an older player, they've got Aaron Baines behind him. That's not a whole lot there. So it's a risky plan on their part. And I tend to agree. They probably will win 53 or so games again. They'll have a good season, but it's looking like the Cavs are probably going to win closer to 60. So, yeah, I think they're fighting for second place.
I would take the under on both of those, Brian. Just the Cavs.
Sure, I agree.
Have a lot of age and injury, and 60 is hard. But I would say the under on 53 on the Celtics. I still...
They did get a little lucky last year.
They got a little lucky last season, and that, like, that's with some of their players playing over their heads. So it's kind of like, unless Kyrie Irving takes a big jump and Marcus Morris takes a big jump and a rookie or one of their rookie or young players takes a big jump, this team isn't even as good as they were last season. And that's my point. That's to get even with last season, not to exceed it. All right, so we'll be talking more Celtics. I'm sure we'll be looking with bated breath. I am waiting for them to break our hearts like they seem to do every year. All right. Last topic. This is from Patrick. So he brought up that Phillip Rivers spent $200,000 on a car that's essentially a mobile film room. So obviously what happened, the Chargers left San Diego for Los Angeles, right?
Yeah, that's right. It makes me sad to hear that on broadcast TV now, but it happened.
Now, I mean, that's for the best for San Diego, right? You don't want to spend money on a stadium. Let Los Angeles waste money. Which is kind of a shame. And he didn't want to uproot his family, so he's staying in San Diego, but he's going to commute 90 minutes to Los Angeles. I don't know what time of day 90 minutes is, right? Because California, a commute can take forever depending on time of day. But so he spent $200,000 on a car to study film. Patrick brought up an article over at Vice. I thought their sports section was closed, so yeehaw. And basically the article tries to go for the point of, oh, look at this nuts sports owner spending $200,000 on a car. And Patrick made the very astute observation, no, that's not how you view it. You basically ask, how much money does Phillip Rivers have or make? And he makes $22 million a year. $200,000 is less than 1% of his gross salary. And by the way, since this is clearly a business-related expense, that's not even going to be hard, so he'll be able to do some tax stuff with it. It helps minimize the pain of his commute, is what Patrick says, and it utilizes time to study video. And so I'm gonna. Do you want to read it? I'll let you be Patrick here. So read some of Patrick's quotes.
Sure. So here's Patrick's rant. The author thinks it's nuts. I think actually this is totally sane and reasonable way for an NFL quarterback to spend his money. Seriously, he makes $22 million a year, 1% of his salary. You already said that, on a vehicle to minimize the pain of a commute and to utilize the time to study video. It makes all kinds of sense, so much so that it surprises me that no one else has done it. It seems spectacularly economically and financially illiterate to deride this. Excuse me. He's going after the author, not complimenting Rivers here. How the fuck does this make any less sense than, say, buying any boat ever? Boats are spectacular money sinks, which practically every player does. This is literally the equivalent of me buying my computer chair for $1,200. I spent a lot of fucking time in that chair. It's worth every penny, even when a non-desktop oriented job thinks it's ridiculous money for a chair. So good comments from Patrick. And of course, this article does have some Exhibit Yo-Dog memes in it. Whenever there's a car, you have to have that. So I appreciate those memes as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've always talked how money in sports is so weird because people always look at just the number, right? The shock value. That's $100,000. That's $200,000. And they don't really look at it in context. And while I do think a lot of athletes do waste money and do stupid things, yeah, this is absolutely a very logical move to make. And so it's weird to go after. Yeah, it's really weird to go after Phillip Rivers for this. And both Patrick and I really think it makes a lot of sense. And then the point I brought up, the thought experiment I've had, I think everybody's had this, is you go to the supermarket, they have like the automated checkout machines, and you put in $10 and you're supposed to get back $5.10, and a dime comes out and you can't see where the dime came out, right? Because like they have an automated coin slot. You can't see, you look around, it's maybe a little grimy, and you're like, should I even bother grabbing that 10 cents, right? Is this even worth my time? And, you kind of move that thought experiment further where you go, is there a point where $1 falls on the floor and it's not worth my time to bend over and pick it up? Or if I was rich enough, $100, right? If I was worth $1,000 an hour to do like speaking engagements, and I was worried I might be a minute late to a talk that I could charge by the minute for, it wouldn't be worth my time to stop to pick up $100 if it was going to take me a minute. Like think of like a lawyer, for instance, who charges, by the hour and has a conference call to get you that has a hard stop. So like if I show up 5 minutes early, I get to charge an additional 5 minutes. If I'm 5 minutes late, that's going to cost me time is money, right? And so it's kind of this same point where you have to think of it in that regard. And so, like Patrick points out, when we're looking at athletes wasting money, there are lots of things that are stupid investments. The great ESPN 30 for 30 documentary Broke talks about how athletes the reason a lot of athletes go broke is that they avoid the very sensible, easy investments, right? They avoid just going to a bank and putting their money in some fund that's going to make 4 to 7% a year. They invest in a dry cleaner or a restaurant, and these businesses have very high failure rates. So it's kind of like when you're going to look at a player making stupid money decisions, don't look at the player that goes, I don't want to uproot my family, which makes a hell of a lot of sense to a lot of people. Like I'm in the same boat where I could see myself getting a job in Madison or Green Bay and going, I really, really like Appleton, Wisconsin. I don't want to leave. And if I don't think it's going to be a permanent thing, Phillip Rivers is 35 years old. He's only got so much football left in him. And if his kids are settled in San Diego, I could see him going, I'm not going to move them. I'm just going to endure the commute for the next couple of years and then settle down in San Diego. Makes a hell of a lot of sense. So yeah, I mean, just one of those where I like Patrick's point where it's kind of like, if you're going to shine a spotlight on an athlete for being dumb, lots of athletes do dumb stuff. This wasn't one of them.
Yeah, and I'll temper Patrick's rant a little bit by saying I doubt that most Chargers fans or NFL fans overall would agree with this author. I think the author was well in the minority. I was scrolling through the replies to the tweet with the images a little bit, and everyone's like, oh, what a boss, And I was talking about Exhibit, Pimp My Ride memes earlier. I mean, that's the whole reason that show exists, right? People love cars. They love customizing it. And I don't know, Americans love this kind of stuff in general. And, for those that don't, that I guess that's where this guy falls in. Maybe this is just opulence to spend that much money on a car that is, maybe if it's not a lot for his salary, it's a lot for the average American. Well, one of the things we always like to say on this show is pro athletes are small potatoes in the grand scheme of American opulence. If you're looking at billionaires in business and other industries, Phillip Rivers is not very, overspending compared to those guys.
Remind me of his name. I can't believe I'm dropping it, but the owner of the Portland Trailblazers, co-founder of Microsoft.
Yeah, Paul Allen.
Paul Allen has a yacht, and he pays people to ride behind his yacht, I believe on jet skis, to pick up basketballs because he has a basketball court on his yacht. If you're going to talk about just like literally someone taking money and lighting it on fire for fun, that's it. It's like Paul Allen spent, like to Patrick's point, if Paul Allen spent $1 million on a supercomputer cluster with 20 screens so that he could watch markets or whatever better, we wouldn't say, oh, why is he wasting $1 million on a computer? We go, oh, look at this amazing piece of technology. So, and then Patrick's point was even better. We're like, just a chair, right? And it's a business expense that makes a lot of sense. I have not reviewed these, Brian. This is the last bullet point on our script before we head here. But you pointed out that the NBA 2K ratings are out, and all I can say is after a couple of years, after doing this for a few years, after looking at them, whatever freaking Kool-Aid the people that make the NBA 2K ratings drink, they don't know what the fuck they're doing. I'm in a custom mood here, right?
This is Ronnie 2K, Ronnie Singh we're talking about here. He fields all these for 2K. Go ahead.
But yeah, whatever the 2K, whoever makes the 2K ratings, they don't know what the hell they're doing, and they just, at this point, they make me laugh. Yeah, the idea that DeMarcus Cousins is the top center in the league is funny, and it explains a lot of all-star games. It explains a lot of fan perception. It's just one more thing. I've said we're the Get Off Our Lawn podcast, and as the years progress, I'm like, mainstream media doesn't know what they're talking about. Fans don't know what they're talking about. Coaches don't know what they're talking about. Not a surprise for me to say NBA 2K doesn't know what they're talking about.
I'd say Paul George and Kyrie Irving are also very overrated in this game.
I mean, they're stars, dude. They're gonna turn around the Celtics. They're gonna turn around the Lakers, right?
Yeah, we'll find out. But yeah, it was cool that these came out today. The game itself, 2K18, is coming out soon, and we'll see if Andrew Sutton has some NBA 2K content pretty soon.
All right, so one last thing. He's just made my life easy. I'll add it to the script. But Dave Barry wrote another article for Forbes. Again, he's going to do 5 of these a month, apparently, or somewhere near that.
Ooh.
So that means if I don't have a bunch of shout-outs prepared, all I have to do is say Dave Barry. And so what he basically wrote about this season is how NFL quarterbacks aren't consistent and how there are 4 new players. I'm trying to think, like Jay Cutler, a few others. I don't know football well enough. That changed teams this last season. He basically says the numbers say we have no idea if they'll be good or bad. So, and by the way, what's funny is if you wanted to be a real jerk, because Kaepernick's in the news, and why doesn't Kaepernick have a job? Why doesn't Kaepernick have a job? We agree. We're not saying that teams are right or wrong, except they're wrong, to hire him. We're just saying it's very obvious they're doing it for racism. And if you argue otherwise, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Like you can say it's within their right to do so, which it is. You can say it's their team, they can do what they want, which is true. But at this point, it's just very obvious. The reason Kaepernick doesn't have a job is that the stances he has taken on various social justice platforms make rich white owners uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it's weird that he's getting singled out too, since everyone else is doing it now. But them's the breaks.
Going to say to the point, if you wanted to use Dave Barry's article, you could say, well, this economist points out that we have no idea if a quarterback is good season to season, and so there's no reason to hire Kaepernick over someone else. Like, if you want to be a jerk, this is the article to use. Please don't do that. But yeah, so actually maybe I'll retract my shout out because of what it can be used for. Anyway, there's that. Brian, do you have any other shout outs to give?
No, let's take us out.
All right, this has been the Boxscore Geek Show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We are on iTunes and Stitcher. The Boxscore Geek Show. Subscribe, upvote. It helps us out. We go live every week, Tuesday or Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. This week we're a little early, but usually 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on twitch.tv/nerdnumbers. If you missed the live show, you can catch the recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers. Produced by Brian Foster, who you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. That's been our show, and we will see you next time.